My name is Mark Ryland. I'm 53 years old, and for 25 of those years I worked as a land surveyor. Before that, I was in the Army Corps of Engineers. I've spent the better part of my adult life in the woods, in swamps, in places most people only see from a highway moving at 70 miles an hour. I know the sounds of the forest, the signs of its animals, the feel of the ground under my boots. I'm not a fanciful man. I don't believe in ghosts or UFOs or any of that. I believe in what I can see, what I can measure, and what I can reason out. At least, I used to. This happened 6 years ago in the low country of South Carolina. Not far from the Francis Marion National Forest, a sprawling, humid expanse of pine flatwoods and cypress swamps that can swallow a man whole if he isn't careful. My company had a contract with a big timber conglomerate to survey a massive tract of land they'd just acquired, bordering the national forest. It was a miserable job in the middle of July. The air was thick enough to drink, a soupy mix of heat, humidity, and the constant drone of insects. The ground was either sandy soil that got everywhere, or black, sucking mud that tried to pull your boots off with every step. There were 3 of us on the crew, me, Cal, and a new kid named Brian. Calvin Hayes, was my partner for over a decade. He was an ex-Marine, quiet, steady as a rock. He was the kind of man you wanted with you when things went sideways. He didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. He'd seen things in his time, and he carried a quiet competence that was reassuring. We understood each other without needing a lot of words. Brian was the opposite. He was 22, fresh out of a technical college program, and full of the kind of loud, misplaced confidence that only youth can provide. He saw the job as a temporary inconvenience before he found something better, something in an air-conditioned office. He hated the heat, the bugs, the silence of the woods. He was always cracking jokes, mostly bad ones, trying to fill the quiet that made him so uncomfortable. Cal and I tolerated him. He was a good kid, just green. He hadn't learned yet that the woods demand respect, that you don't mock what you don't understand. Our routine was the same every day. We'd meet at a diner off the highway at dawn, load up on coffee and biscuits, then drive the company's heavy-duty Ford F-250 out to the site. The last 10 miles were on a network of unpaved, rutted logging roads that snaked through the pine forests. The truck was our lifeline. It carried our gear, our water, our first aid kits, and our only way back to civilization. We'd park it at the end of whatever trail we were working on that day and head in on foot with the total station, the prisms, and the machetes. The first week was unremarkable. It was just hard, hot work. We cut sight lines through dense underbrush, sweated through our clothes by 9 in the morning, and spent our days fighting off deer flies and mosquitoes. The woods were alive with normal sounds. The chatter of squirrels, the call of a distant hawk, the rustle of an armadillo in the leaf litter. At night, you'd hear the owls and the coyotes. It was a familiar symphony. Nothing was out of place. The change started subtly. It was a Tuesday in the second week. We were working a line deep into a section that transitioned from pine forest to a darker, wetter cypress swamp. The air grew stiller, the light dimmer under the dense canopy. The usual chorus of insects and birds seemed to fade, replaced by a heavy, watchful silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Brian noticed it first, of course. He couldn't stand it.
"Man, it's creepy out here," he said, swatting at a mosquito on his neck. "Dead silent. You guys hear that?" "Hear what?" "It's the absence of sound, kid," Cal grunted, driving a survey stake into the soft earth with a mallet. "Exactly," Brian said. "It's like everything's hiding from something." I didn't say anything, but I felt it too. I'd been in woods all over the country, and I knew that sudden silence often meant a predator was nearby. A bobcat, maybe a coyote pack on the move, or a big gator if you were near water. But this felt different. The silence was absolute. Not a cricket, not a bird, not even the hum of a fly. It was as if the entire forest had collectively decided to go mute. We worked for another hour in that oppressive quiet, the only sounds being our own movements and the thud of Cal's mallet. The feeling of being watched was a physical presence, a prickling on the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. Then we heard the first sound that was truly wrong.
It came from deep within the swamp, off to our left. It was a single, heavy thump. It wasn't the crack of a falling branch or the sound of an animal. It was a deep, resonant impact, like something massive had been dropped from a great height into thick mud. We all froze. "What was that?" Brian whispered, his eyes wide. Cal stood up straight, his hand resting near the butt of the holstered pistol he always carried in the field. It was a habit from his service days, one we never questioned. Could be a dead tree finally letting go, a big one. I shook my head. Didn't sound like wood splintering. It was dull, a single impact. We waited, listening. The silence pressed back in around us. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, it came again. Thump. Closer this time. It was followed by a faint, wet, tearing sound. My mind raced through the possibilities. A black bear? Maybe, but the sound was wrong. A poacher dressing a kill? Unlikely this deep in, and it didn't sound like human activity. "All right, let's pack it in for the day," I said, my voice low. I didn't like it. My gut, an instinct honed by years in the field, was screaming at me that something was fundamentally out of place. Brian didn't need to be told twice. He started gathering the gear with a haste that was unusual for him. Cal moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes scanning the dark wall of cypress and tupelo trees that ringed our position. As we made our way back towards the truck, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was no longer a vague prickle. It was a focused, malevolent stare that followed our every step. We found the deer about halfway back to the truck. It was lying in a small clearing, or what was left of it. It was a large doe, and it had been killed recently. The steam was still rising faintly from the body in the humid air. But it wasn't the fact that it was dead that stopped us in our tracks. It was how it was killed. It wasn't the work of a bear or a coyote. I've seen their kills. They're messy, but there's a logic to them. This was different. This was annihilation. The doe's neck was broken at an impossible angle, its head twisted almost completely around. But the real horror was its torso. The rib cage had been ripped open with such force that the ribs were splayed out like the petals of a grotesque flower. The internal organs were gone, not eaten, just gone. The spine, visible through the gaping wound, was snapped in half. "My God," Brian breathed, turning away and gagging. Cal knelt, his face a grim mask. He didn't touch it. He just looked. No claw marks on the hide. No bite marks on the neck. Look at the legs. All 4 of them are broken. Snapped clean like twigs. He looked up at me, and for the first time in the 10 years I'd known him, I saw genuine confusion in his eyes. "Mark, what the hell does this?" I had no answer. The force required to do that to a full-grown deer was astronomical. It wasn't just strength. It was rage. It was a display. Something had not just killed this animal for food. It had obliterated it to make a point. I scanned the ground around the carcass. The soft earth was a mess of scuffed leaves and mud, but there were no clear tracks.
No bear paw prints, no coyote tracks, nothing identifiable. Just chaos. "Let's go," I said, my voice tight. "Now." We walked the rest of the way to the truck in silence, moving much faster than we normally would. The heavy quiet had been replaced by a new sound, the buzzing of flies gathering at the kill site behind us. When we reached the truck, the relief was palpable. The solid steel of the F-250 felt like a fortress. We threw the gear in the back, not bothering to stow it properly. We just wanted to be gone. As Brian was closing his door, it happened. A rock, the size of a large grapefruit, arched out of the tree line and slammed into the ground not 5 feet from him. It hit with a heavy thud, spraying dirt and pine needles. It hadn't been thrown in a high arc. It came in fast and low with incredible velocity. We all froze, staring at the rock, then at the dense woods from where it had come. "What the?" Brian stammered, scrambling into the cab. "Did you see that?" I had seen it. I had seen the impossible speed of it. No man could throw a rock that size, that hard, from that distance. The tree line was a good 50 yards away. It was a physical impossibility. "Someone's messing with us," Cal said, his voice dangerously low as he climbed into the passenger seat. He didn't sound convinced. He was trying to fit it into a box he understood. Pranksters. Locals who didn't want us there. But his hand was resting on his pistol again. "Get us out of here, Mark," he said, his eyes fixed on the spot where the rock had emerged. I didn't need any encouragement. I turned the key and the big diesel engine roared to life, shattering the unnatural quiet. I put the truck in gear and spun the tires in the soft dirt, getting us turned around and heading down the narrow logging road. I drove faster than I should have, the truck bouncing and jostling over the deep ruts. I just wanted to put distance between us in that place. In the rearview mirror, I could see the wall of green and brown receding. Nothing moved. There was no sign of who or what had thrown that rock. But I could feel those eyes on us, watching us leave. We were about 5 miles down the road, just starting to relax a little, when something flashed across the road ahead. It was maybe 200 yards in front of us, a fleeting shape that moved from the woods on the right to the woods on the left. It was big, and it was dark, and it was fast. "Did you see that?" Brian yelled from the back seat, his voice cracking. "I saw it," Cal said. "Too big for a coyote, too fast for a bear." It had been upright. That was the other thing. For the split second it was in the open, it was moving on 2 legs. It was a loping, unnatural gait, but it was bipedal. My mind refused to process it. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the shadows from the trees playing games with my eyes. It was a deer, and its leap had looked strange. It had to be. "Probably just a deer," I said, trying to convince myself as much as them. Neither of them answered. The joke-cracking, confident Brian was gone, replaced by a pale, silent kid staring out the window. Cal was a statue, his gaze sweeping the woods on his side of the truck. The rest of the drive out to the paved highway was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves was a potential attack. When our tires finally hit the asphalt, it felt like we had crossed a border back into the real world. We didn't talk much on the drive back to town. We were all lost in our own thoughts, trying to reconcile what we had seen and heard with the world we knew. The dead deer, the thrown rock, the shape on the road. None of it made sense. We tried to rationalize it. It was a bear, a very large and aggressive bear, and the shape was just a trick of the light. The rock was thrown by some local hermit angry about the logging. It was a string of coincidences. But the explanations felt hollow, thin excuses our logical minds were creating to ward off a terrifying, illogical truth. The next morning, nobody wanted to go back. Brian flat out said he was quitting. Cal and I talked him down. We told him we'd report the aggressive bear to the game warden,
and that we would be more careful. We had a job to do. I felt like a hypocrite saying it. Every instinct in my body was telling me to stay away from that place. But my rational mind, the surveyor, the engineer, told me I was being foolish. It was a bear. We would be fine in the truck.
We decided not to go back to the same spot. We would work a different section, miles away from the swamp, on the other side of the tract. It felt safer. The day was tense but uneventful. The normal sounds of the forest were back, and it was reassuring. We worked until dusk, pushing ourselves to make up for lost time. By the time we packed up, the sun was low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows through the pines. The drive out was quiet. We were on a different logging road, but it was just as narrow and winding as the one from the day before. The dense woods crowded in on both sides, the branches of overgrown sweet gum and oak trees scraping against the sides of the truck like fingernails. I had the headlights on, cutting a bright white tunnel through the gathering twilight. We were maybe halfway to the main road. I was navigating a sharp, blind curve to the left, my speed down to maybe 15 miles an hour. As the headlights swung around, they illuminated the road ahead. And it was there. It was standing in the middle of the road, not 30 yards in front of us. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else entirely, something that had no place in this world. My foot slammed on the brake pedal out of pure reflex. The truck screeched, the heavy-duty tires locking up and skidding on the packed dirt. We slid to a stop less than 50 feet from it. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the idling rumble of the diesel engine and the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears. It stood on two legs, but they were wrong. They were bent backwards, like a dog's or a bird's, with massive, corded thighs and long, thin shins. It was tall, easily 7.5, maybe 8 feet. Its body was a horrifying mix of canine and human. It had the broad, powerful shoulders of a gorilla, tapering down to a narrow waist. Its arms were too long for its body, ending in what looked like large, human-like hands, but with thick, black claws curling from the fingertips. The creature was covered in coarse, matted fur, the color of dirty charcoal. But the head was the stuff of nightmares. It was purely canine. A long, tapered muzzle like a wolf's or a German shepherd's, filled with yellowed, prominent teeth. The lips were pulled back in a silent snarl. Its ears were tall and pointed, swiveling independently to catch every sound. And its eyes. In the direct glare of the headlights, they glowed with a sickening, fiery orange light. They weren't the dumb, reflective eyes of an animal caught in the beams. They were intelligent. They were aware. And they were filled with a burning, absolute hatred. For a moment, it just stood there staring at us, its head cocked slightly as if it were studying us. The sheer impossibility of it paralyzed me. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to categorize what I was seeing and failing completely. This wasn't in any biology book. This didn't exist. "Go," Cal whispered, his voice a strained rasp. "Mark, go, now." His voice broke the spell. I fumbled for the gear shift, my hand shaking. But I was too slow. The creature lowered its head, its massive shoulders bunching. It let out a sound that I will hear in my dreams for the rest of my life. It was a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very frame of the truck, a sound of pure menace that promised violence. And then it charged. It covered the 50 feet in 3 long, loping strides. It moved with an unnatural speed and grace for something so large. It didn't try to go around the truck. It came straight for the front. I braced for impact, a scream dying in my throat. The collision was apocalyptic. It was like hitting a brick wall. The creature launched itself into the air and hit the grill of the F-250 head-on. The sound was a deafening crunch of metal and bone. The truck, all 7,000 pounds of it, was shoved backwards several feet. The windshield exploded inwards, showering the cab with 1,000,000 tiny cubes of safety glass. The airbags deployed with a violent bang, filling the cab with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt chemicals. I was thrown against my seatbelt, the air knocked out of me. The deployed airbag was a suffocating pillow against my face. For a few seconds, there was only ringing in my ears and confusion. I clawed the airbag away, gasping for breath. Through the shattered windshield, I could see the hood of the truck was crumpled like a tin can. The heavy steel grille was bent inwards, broken. "Everyone okay?" I yelled, my voice hoarse. I'm okay," Cal coughed from the passenger seat. He was pushing his own airbag away. A high-pitched, keening sound came from the back. It was Brian. He was screaming. Not a yell of defiance, but a pure animal wail of absolute terror. A heavy, scraping sound came from the front of the truck. The creature was pulling itself up. It had hit a 2.5-ton truck head-on, and it was getting back up. A massive clawed hand appeared on the crumpled hood, then another. It slowly, deliberately pulled its enormous frame onto the hood, its glowing orange eyes peering at us through the spider-webbed remains of the windshield. Its breath fogged the broken glass. It was then that I saw the damage to it. There was a deep gash on its shoulder, and its muzzle was bleeding. We had hurt it. But it didn't seem to care. It seemed enraged. It let out another of those terrifying growls, a sound that felt like it was coming from the center of the earth. "Get your gun," I shouted at Cal. Cal was already moving. He had his 9mm Glock out, the slide racked. He aimed it through the windshield at the creature's head. But the thing was intelligent. It saw the gun. It didn't flinch. Instead, it swiped a massive clawed hand across the remnants of the windshield, sending a fresh shower of glass into the cab. Then it moved off the hood, disappearing from our view. For a terrifying second, there was silence, broken only by Brian's panicked sobbing. "Where did it go?" I whispered, my eyes darting around. Bam! A tremendous impact rocked the driver's side of the truck. My door buckled inwards, the window shattering completely. A long, clawed arm reached inside, swiping wildly. I threw myself across the center console, the claws missing my head by inches but tearing deep gashes in the headrest where I had just been. The smell of it filled the cab. It was a rank, foul odor of wet fur, rot, and something musky and predatory. Cal leaned across me and fired 2 shots out my shattered window. The explosions were deafening inside the cab. A pained, furious roar answered from outside. The arm retracted. "It's on my side," Cal yelled. I looked over and saw a monstrous face pressed against the passenger window. Its lips were peeled back, saliva dripping from its yellow fangs. It stared at Cal, its orange eyes burning with hateful intelligence. It raised a fist and punched the window. The tempered glass crazed but held. It punched again, harder. The glass bowed inwards. In the back, Brian was completely lost to panic. "Let me out! I gotta get out!" he screamed, fumbling with his door handle. "No, Brian, stay in the truck," I yelled, trying to get back into my seat. "Stay down." But he wasn't listening. He was consumed by a primal fear that had overridden all reason. He got his door open. It was the worst possible thing he could have done. The creature on Cal's side vanished. In the same instant, there was a sound of tearing metal from the back of the truck. I twisted around to see what was happening. Brian had his door open about 6 inches, trying to squeeze out. The creature was there. It had moved from the front passenger side to the rear driver's side in less than a second. It jammed its claws into the gap of the open door and ripped it off its hinges as if it were made of cardboard. The heavy steel door flew into the darkness with a crash. Brian screamed, a choked, final sound. The creature reached into the cab, grabbed him by the front of his shirt, and yanked him out. It happened so fast. One moment Brian was there, and the next he was gone, pulled into the night. We heard one sharp, wet crack, and his scream cut off abruptly. There was a sound of something heavy being dragged into the underbrush, and then silence. Cal and I sat there, frozen in shock and horror. Brian was gone, just like that. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise had been. "Mark," Cal said, his voice eerily calm. "It's coming back." I looked at him. His face was pale, but his hands holding the pistol were steady. He was a Marine again. The training had taken over.
He was looking out his side window into the darkness. I forced my brain to work. The truck was our only hope. The engine was still running. I shoved the gear shift into reverse. The transmission groaned in protest, but it engaged. I stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched backwards, tires spinning, and slammed into a pine tree. The jolt threw us forward. "It's here," Cal yelled. His window exploded inward. The creature's arm shot through, grabbing for him. Cal fired 3 times, point blank, into the arm and shoulder. The thing roared in pain and fury, and for a moment, it pulled back. That was the only chance I needed. I slammed the truck into drive. The front of the vehicle was a wreck, but the wheels still turned. I floored the accelerator. The truck shot forward, straight at the spot where the creature had been standing. My intention was to run it over, to crush it under the weight of the truck. But it was too fast. As we surged forward, I saw it leap to the side, a dark blur moving with impossible agility. I felt a glancing impact on the passenger side, a heavy, scraping thud, and then we were past it. I didn't slow down. I kept my foot pressed to the floor. The logging road was a dark, narrow tunnel, and I was flying through it blind, the one remaining headlight beam bouncing crazily. Branches scraped and screeched along the sides of the truck, a constant, horrifying sound. The side mirrors were torn off. The already damaged truck was being battered from all sides. I didn't care. "Is it behind us?" I yelled, my eyes glued to the treacherous road ahead. Cal had turned in his seat, his pistol trained on the empty space where the rear windshield used to be. "I don't see it. Wait, yes, it's coming." I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. For a horrifying second, I saw it. It was running behind us, easily keeping pace with the truck, which was doing close to 40 miles an hour. Its long, loping strides ate up the ground. The single headlight of the pursuing F-250 illuminated its form, a bounding demon chasing us through the night. Its orange eyes glowed in the darkness, 2 burning embers of hate. "It's gaining," Cal shouted. I pushed the accelerator harder. The engine screamed. The truck fishtailed on the loose dirt, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I was going to lose control and crash into the trees, where it would be on us in seconds. I wrestled with the wheel, correcting the skid. The creature was right behind us now. I could hear its heavy footfalls, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the ground. It was close enough that I could hear its ragged, panting breaths. Then it leaped. It landed on the tailgate with a metallic boom that echoed through the truck. The rear of the vehicle sagged under its weight. A clawed hand reached over the roof of the cab, scrabbling for a handhold. Cal leaned out his shattered window and fired the rest of his magazine at it. The shots were deafening. I heard the bullets thud into its body, heard it grunt with pain. But it didn't let go. Its hand found a purchase on the edge of the roof. It was trying to pull itself onto the cab. I started swerving violently from side to side, trying to throw it off. The truck careened down the narrow road, slamming against the trees on either side. A low-hanging oak branch swept across the back of the truck with a deafening crash. I heard the creature roar in pain as the branch hit it. I looked in the mirror and saw it was gone. It had been knocked off.
I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. I kept driving, my foot to the floor, until I saw the blessed sight of reflected light on a road sign ahead. We were nearing the highway. A minute later, the truck burst out of the woods and onto the smooth, clean asphalt of the state road. I skidded to a stop in the middle of the empty 2-lane highway, the engine shuddering. For a long time, we just sat there, gasping for air, our bodies trembling with adrenaline and shock. The cab was a wreck. It was filled with glass and dust, and the coppery smell of Brian's blood. The silence of the night was broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and our own ragged breaths. Cal finally broke the silence. "We have to call the sheriff." I drove us to the nearest town, a small, sleepy place called Jamestown. The sheriff's office was a small brick building with a single patrol car parked out front. We stumbled inside, looking like we'd just survived a war. We were covered in dirt, sweat, and glass. My shirt was torn. Cal was bleeding from a dozen small cuts from the shattered windows. The deputy on duty was a young man with a tired face. He looked at us, at our condition, at the wrecked truck outside, and his expression shifted from boredom to alarm. We told him our story. We told him everything, from the strange silence in the woods to the dead deer to the attack on the truck. I know how we must have sounded, like madmen. He listened patiently, taking notes, but his eyes were filled with a deep, profound skepticism. When I described the creature, the dog's head, the backward legs, the glowing eyes, I saw him make a decision. He decided we were either drunk, on drugs, or in shock and hallucinating. He and another deputy followed us back out to the site. The drive felt surreal, returning to the place of such absolute terror in the relative safety of a police escort. When we got there, the scene was just as we had left it. The logging road was torn up from my frantic driving. We found the spot where we were attacked. The ground was littered with broken glass and pieces of the truck's grill. They found Brian's door, lying twisted in the underbrush. And then they found what was left of Brian. I won't describe it. I can't. But it was consistent with a massive animal attack. A bear, the senior deputy said, nodding to himself. A very big, very angry black bear. There are no bears that big around here, Cal said, his voice flat. And a bear didn't rip a steel door off a truck. The deputy just gave him a pitying look. You boys have been through a trauma. The mind plays tricks on you. You saw a bear, it attacked your truck, and your friend panicked. It's a tragedy, but that's all it is. They searched for tracks. They found some indistinct impressions in the soft dirt, which they said were from a large bear. They ignored the fact that the stride length between them was over 10 feet. They found the rock that had been thrown at us. The deputy hefted it. Bear could have knocked this loose, he said, offering a weak explanation that explained nothing. The official report listed Brian's death as a fatal bear attack. Our company's insurance covered it. Brian's family got a payout for a tragic workplace accident. Cal and I were given paid leave for trauma counseling. The official story was neat and tidy. It made sense. It fit into the world that everyone knew and understood. Our story, the real story, was buried. A few days later, as we were giving our final statements, an older officer pulled me aside. He must have been close to retirement. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, and his eyes had a weary wisdom to them. Son, he said, his voice a low rumble. I've been working this county for 40 years. We get a lot of strange calls from out in the Francis Marion. People go missing. Hunters find kill sites that don't make sense. We write it all up as bear attacks or people getting lost in the swamp. He paused, looking me straight in the eye. I don't know what you saw out there, but I believe you saw something. My advice to you? Take the company's money, move on, and never,
ever go back into those woods. There are things in this world older and meaner than we are. Some places are best left alone. It was the only validation I ever got. Cal quit the next week. He packed up his house and moved to Arizona. He said he needed to be somewhere with no trees, where he could see for 100 miles in every direction. We talk on the phone sometimes, but we never talk about that night. We don't have to. It's always there, an unspoken shadow between us. I quit too. I couldn't do it anymore.
I sold my surveying equipment. I can't even go for a walk in a city park without feeling a prickle of fear, without my eyes scanning the tree line. The sound of a dog barking in the distance can make my blood run cold. I took a desk job, an office job, the kind of life Brian wanted. I spend my days surrounded by concrete and steel, and I still don't feel safe. I live with what happened every day. I live with the memory of Brian's last scream. I live with the image of those glowing orange eyes, filled with an intelligence that was not animal, but something other, something ancient and malevolent. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. I don't know what it was or why it's there. I don't care to know. All I know is that the world is not the safe, rational place I once believed it to be. We live on a well-lit stage, and we tell ourselves that the stage is all there is. But beyond the lights, in the deep woods and the dark swamps, the real world waits, and it is filled with teeth. So, this is my warning. Stay out of the woods. Heed that feeling on the back of your neck. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the birds and insects have gone silent, turn around and run. Don't wait to find out what they're hiding from. Just run.